What if I told you there was a punishment so brutal, so inhuman, that death was the kindest part of it? A slow, excruciating torture where victims rotted alive, fully aware every step of the way. It was meant to break not just the body, but the mind and soul. This is the haunting story of scaphism, a method of execution so disturbing that history tried to bury it. The Persian Empire stretched across millions of square miles at its height, ruling over dozens of rebellious cultures. To maintain absolute control, they needed punishments that did more than execute. They needed to crush the spirit of resistance. This explains why swift beheadings or hangings weren't enough. The empire developed scaphism for cases where death alone couldn't send the right message to potential traitors and deserters. When a soldier abandoned his post or a governor conspired against the king, standard executions risked turning them into martyrs. Scaphism solved this problem through prolonged psychological terror. The victim would be force-fed milk and honey, then trapped between two hollowed-out boats with only their head and limbs exposed. Left floating in a stagnant pond, they'd slowly drown in their own filth, while insects devoured them alive. Witnesses would see the entire process unfold over days or weeks. No myths, no rumors, just undeniable horror. Compare this to other Persian execution methods. Impalement killed victims within hours. Crucifixion usually took days. But scaphism stretched the process out long enough for entire villages to witness every deteriorating stage. Historians note how Persian officials sometimes moved execution sites between towns, ensuring widespread exposure. Each community would see what happened to those who challenged imperial authority. The Persians weren't just punishing individuals, they were programming obedience into survivors. Scaphism bypassed rational fear and targeted primal instincts. Seeing a person eaten alive by maggots triggers deeper revulsion than watching a blade fall. The empire weaponized disgust, ensuring even the bravest rebels would hesitate before crossing them. Modern parallels exist in psychological warfare tactics, but none match scaphism's calculated cruelty. This wasn't just about ending lives, it was about reshaping how the living viewed resistance. The empire understood that true power lies not in how quickly you kill, but in how thoroughly you dismantle the will to oppose you. There were cases where victims lasted over 2 weeks in this state, fully conscious as their bodies literally rotted around them. That's what made this method unique. It wasn't designed for efficiency, but for maximum psychological damage to everyone involved. Most execution methods throughout history focus on the victim's suffering. Scaphism targeted observers just as much. Entire populations learned to associate rebellion with slow decomposition rather than heroic sacrifice. That's why Persian records rarely mention it. The terror worked best when no one could be certain if this fate awaited them. Uncertainty bred compliance more effectively than any written law. That's the true power of psychological warfare, ancient or modern. Fear doesn't need documentation when it lives in the imagination. We know about scaphism primarily from one ancient source, Plutarch's Life of Artaxerxes. Written centuries after the Persian Empire fell, this biography describes scaphism in horrifying detail. But here's the problem. No Persian writings or records mention this method, not a single one. That leaves historians with a question: was Plutarch documenting real practices, or exaggerating to make the Persians seem more brutal? The key story comes from Plutarch's account of Mithridates, a soldier who offended King Artaxerxes. According to the text, Mithridates was placed between two boats, force-fed milk and honey until he developed severe diarrhea, then left floating in a stagnant pond. Insects swarmed his contaminated body, burrowing into his flesh as he lay trapped. Plutarch claims Mithridates survived for 17 days, an unthinkable length of time considering the conditions. The description matches later medieval accounts, but Persians themselves never wrote about this method. This gap in Persian records suggests two possibilities. First, scaphism might have been a rare, secret punishment used only in extreme cases. Persian emperors often concealed brutal tactics to avoid inspiring rebellion. Alternatively, Greek historians like Plutarch could have embellished Persian cruelty as propaganda. Greeks and Persians were bitter rivals. and stories of monstrous torture made for effective wartime narratives. Yet, even if Plutarch exaggerated, something about scaphism feels too specific, too methodically cruel to be pure invention. Consider the details. The force-feeding of milk and honey wasn't random. Honey attracts insects. Whole milk combined with confinement causes explosive diarrhea. This wasn't just about pain, it was about degradation. The victim would lie in their own waste, while flies laid eggs in their flesh. Maggots would hatch and begin eating them alive, focusing on infected areas where skin had broken down. There's a calculated horror to these steps beyond generic sadism. The timing raises another question. Why choose a method that could take weeks? Most execution styles prioritize efficiency. Scaphism seems engineered for maximum psychological impact rather than practicality. This aligns with Persian strategies. Public punishments often lasted days to demoralize witnesses. But without first-hand Persian accounts, we can't confirm if scaphism was policy or myth. Whether real or propaganda, the persistence of scaphism stories reveals something deeper. Ancient societies feared absolute rulers who could inflict prolonged, dehumanizing deaths. The idea resonated because it represented power unchecked by mercy. Even if Plutarch embellished, the terror people felt reading his account was real. That terror, the belief rulers could do this, may have been as powerful as the act itself. The absence of Persian records doesn't disprove scaphism. Empires rarely document their worst atrocities. But it leaves us with an unsettling truth. Some historical horrors exist in the space between fact and rumor, where the fear they inspire matters more than their physical reality. Scaphism worked through a carefully designed sequence of physiological torment. The process began by strapping the victim between two hollowed-out boats or wooden troughs, leaving only their head, hands, and feet exposed. Executioners would then force-feed them a mixture of milk and honey, not just once, but repeatedly, multiple times a day. This served two purposes. It kept the victim alive longer while accelerating the torture. The milk caused uncontrollable diarrhea, while the honey smeared on their exposed skin, and openings attracted insects. Within the first 2 days, the real suffering began. The victim would lie immobilized in their own waste as flies swarmed the honey-coated openings, eyes, mouth, anus. The stagnant air between the boats became toxic with ammonia from urine and the fumes of decomposing feces. Unlike crucifixion victims who might pass out from blood loss or shock, scaphism victims remained fully conscious. Their arms and legs stuck out from the boats, often tied down to prevent any attempt at self-harm that might shorten the ordeal. By day 3 or 4, infections set in. The open wounds where ropes chafed the skin turned septic. Flies laid eggs in these wounds and in the victim's soiled genitals. The first maggots usually appeared around this time, hatching in the warm, moist environment between the boats. The victim could feel them moving but couldn't brush them away. The smell of rotting flesh mixed with feces and soured milk created a stench witnesses described as unbearable from several feet away. Crucifixion caused excruciating pain through muscle cramps and suffocation, but it rarely lasted more than 3 days. Scaphism extended this suffering exponentially. Historical accounts mention victims surviving up to 17 days in this state. The milk and honey diet maintained enough calories to keep them alive, while the insects slowly consumed them. Some victims reportedly went mad before dying, screaming incoherently as maggots ate their eyes or burrowed into their intestines through the anus. The key difference between scaphism and other execution methods was the victim's awareness. They could track their own decomposition day by day. They felt the maggots emerge. They smelled their flesh rotting. Unlike burning at the stake, where smoke inhalation might render someone unconscious, scaphism eliminated every escape, even psychological. Victims couldn't dissociate from what was happening because new torments constantly demanded attention. Itching from insect bites, the burn of infected wounds, the cramping from forced feeding. Executioners sometimes adjusted conditions to prolong the suffering. If a pond was too clean, they added rotting meat to attract more insects. If the victim seemed near death, they reduced the milk feedings just enough to maintain consciousness. The goal wasn't just death, but the complete eradication of dignity. By the end, victims weren't just corpses, they were human-shaped ecosystems of decay, proof of what happened to those who defied the empire. This wasn't punishment. It was the systematic dismantling of a person. By the way, if you're finding this breakdown as fascinating as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated, as we're just getting to the most disturbing parts of this story. The Persians didn't need blades or fire to inflict maximum suffering. They recruited nature's most efficient torturers. Flies, ants, and maggots become unwitting executioners in scaphism, turning the victim's body into a living nightmare. Executioners smeared honey on exposed skin and openings, eyes, mouth, genitals, creating a magnet for insects. This wasn't an accidental byproduct of confinement, it was the entire point. While other methods relied on human hands to deliver pain, scaphism outsourced the work to creatures that never tired, never stopped. The science behind this torture method was horrifically effective. Flies laid eggs in the victim's wounds within hours. Those eggs hatched into maggots that burrow into living tissue, feeding on decaying flesh while the victim remained fully conscious. Unlike mechanical torture devices like the breaking wheel, which shattered bones in minutes, the insect onslaught stretched torment over weeks. Victims felt every movement as maggots tunneled into their flesh, every sting from venomous ants attracted to the honey. The process also accelerated infection. Open wounds festered, turning septic as bacteria from feces and insect bites infiltrated the bloodstream. Contrast this with more straightforward executions. A beheading ends in seconds. Crucifixion kills within days. But scaphism weaponized biology to create suffering no human could replicate manually. The victim couldn't predict which part of their body would be attacked next. Ants crawling into their ears 1 hour, maggots erupting from a wound the next. This unpredictability broke the mind long before the body gave out. Witnesses reported victims screaming not just from pain, but from the unbearable psychological weight of feeling their own decomposition. The insect's role went beyond physical agony. They served as a constant psychological reminder of the victim's helplessness. A swordsman might hesitate before delivering a killing blow, but insects don't stop. They don't feel pity. Even executioners could step away, but the insects worked around the clock. Every bite reinforced the victim's total loss of control, their body no longer theirs, just food for scavengers. Some accounts describe victims begging guards to kill them quickly as maggots reached their eyes or genitals. What made this particularly cruel was the victim's awareness. Unlike burning victims who might pass out from smoke inhalation, scaphism ensured full consciousness. The honey attracted different insects at different stages, first biting flies, then egg-laying blowflies, finally maggots burrowing deep. Each phase brought fresh horrors. The victim could track their own decay like a grisly countdown, swelling from stings, pus-filled wounds, the first sight of wriggling larvae. This method's true innovation wasn't the pain itself, but its duration and inevitability. A breaking wheel victim might die within hours. Scaphism guaranteed days or weeks of suffering with no variables, no chance blows, missing vital organs, no mercifully quick infections. Insects didn't make mistakes. They followed their instincts perfectly, turning the body into a self-sustaining torture chamber. The Persians understood something modern psychology confirms. Uncertainty amplifies suffering. With a blade, you know the worst will be over quickly. With scaphism, you couldn't predict whether maggots would reach your organs before dehydration kills you. That unknown stretched every second into an eternity. Even witnesses couldn't tune it out. The stench of rotting flesh and buzzing flies made the horror inescapable. This raises a disturbing question. Why insects instead of something faster? Because their slow, relentless work served a larger purpose. Scaphism wasn't just about punishing individuals. It aimed to break entire communities. Seeing someone eaten alive leaves a different imprint than watching a clean execution. The insects made the process visceral, primal, something witnesses couldn't rationalize or forget. That's why scaphism stands apart in history's catalogue of cruelty. It didn't just kill. It made nature itself complicit in unraveling a human being piece by piece. The ancient world was full of brutal executions, but scaphism stands apart for how it weaponized time and biology. Compare it to Roman crucifixions. While victims suffered horribly, most died within 2 or 3 days from blood loss, dehydration, or shock. The breaking wheel shattered bones systematically, but victims typically died within hours from trauma. Even being burned at the stake offered relatively quick death once flames reached vital organs. Scaphism dragged the process out for weeks, making the victim an active participant in their own destruction. What made scaphism uniquely horrific wasn't just the duration, but the sensory experience. Crucifixion victims often slipped in and out of consciousness from pain. Scaphism victims remained fully aware as insects crawled into their nose, mouth, and wounds. Imagine feeling maggots hatching in your flesh, unable to brush them away. Victims didn't just endure pain, they watched, smelled, and felt their bodies decompose while still alive. The milk and honey diet kept them conscious even as infections ravaged their systems and insects bred in their waste. Plutarch's account of Mithridates illustrates this perfectly. Most crucifixion victims died within 2 days. Mithridates lasted 17. That's 17 days of feeling muscles cramp from confinement, 17 days of smelling his own rotting flesh, 17 days listening to flies buzz around his face. The Persians didn't just want him dead, they wanted him to experience every stage of his body's breakdown. Modern executions aim for efficiency, but scaphism aims for maximum psychological impact through prolonged exposure. Other ancient punishments caused immense suffering, but none combined so many tortures simultaneously. The brazen bull roasted victims alive, but the process took minutes. Flaying removed skin in strips, but shock typically brought death within hours. Scaphism layered torments. Confinement prevented movement. Force feeding maintained consciousness. Insects caused pain and infection, all while the victim remained fully aware. It wasn't one method of torture, but several working together synergistically. The biological aspect also sets scaphism apart. Most execution methods relied on human action, a blade, rope, or flame. Scaphism outsourced the killing to nature itself. Once the boats were sealed and honey applied, executioners could walk away. Insects didn't tire or show mercy. They methodically consumed the victim according to their instincts, creating suffering no human torturer could replicate precisely. Victims couldn't predict which body part would be attacked next. 1 hour ants in their ears, the next maggots in their wounds. This unpredictability broke victims psychologically before they died physically. Unlike a beheading where death comes instantly, scaphism offered no certainty about when or how the end would arrive. Some victims died from sepsis, others from dehydration, some literally eaten alive. The lack of control over their body, environment, or even manner of death made the experience uniquely terrifying even among ancient punishments. Perhaps most disturbing is how scaphism dehumanized victims completely. Other execution methods left bodies recognizable afterward. Scaphism turned people into something inhuman, bloated, maggot-infested shells that scarcely resembled their former selves before death. This wasn't just about killing criminals, but about demonstrating how easily the empire could reduce a person to nothing. The message was clear. Defiance didn't just mean death, it meant eradication of your very humanity. That lingering psychological impact on witnesses is what truly sets scaphism apart. Seeing someone beheaded becomes routine after a while, the horror fades. But watching a human being slowly consumed by insects leaves an indelible mark. The Persians understood that true power came not from how quickly you could kill, but from how thoroughly you could break people's spirits. Scaphism wasn't just punishment, it was theater designed to rewrite how entire populations thought about resistance. The method's effectiveness explains why it persists in historical memory, despite scant Persian records. Even if exaggerated, Plutarch's account resonates because it represents power taken to its logical extreme. Most ancient executions sought to end life. Scaphism sought to dismantle it piece by piece, making the victim not just die, but participate in their own unmaking. That distinction makes it one of history's most psychologically calculated punishments. Here's a puzzling fact. While Greek historian Plutarch describes scaphism in horrifying detail, Persian records never mentioned it. Not once. This silence raises a disturbing question. Why would an empire known for meticulous record-keeping avoid documenting one of its most brutal punishments? The answer might reveal how power manipulates history. The Persians documented everything: taxes, laws, military campaigns, yet scaphism appears nowhere in their texts. Historians have debated why. One possibility, They considered it too shameful to record. Unlike the Romans, who proudly displayed violence in the Colosseum, Persian rulers may have preferred keeping extreme punishments quiet. Public executions served as warnings, but documenting them risked making the empire seem barbaric rather than powerful. Scaphism's absence from records suggests the Persians understood something crucial. Fear grows strongest in the gaps of knowledge. Compare this to Roman practices. The Colosseum's games were well-documented spectacles, celebrated in art and poetry. Romans saw violence as entertainment and a legitimate display of state power. The Persians took the opposite approach. Their silence on scaphism hints at a different philosophy, that terror works best when people don't know all the details. A whispered rumor about a punishment too horrible to describe could be more effective than a public execution witnessed by thousands. There's another explanation for the lack of records. Scaphism might have been extremely rare, used only in exceptional cases. Historical accounts suggest Persia reserved it for high-profile enemies like traitors or rebel leaders. If only a handful of people ever faced it, officials might not have documented it as standard practice. But rarity alone doesn't explain why later Persian rulers never referenced it. The taboo around discussing it appears deliberate. Greek sources like Plutarch likely exaggerated Persian brutality for political reasons. Athens and Persia were rivals, and describing horrific executions helped portray the empire as monstrous. Yet even if Plutarch embellished, his account aligns with known Persian tactics. Other civilizations used prolonged executions, but none combined confinement, insects, and forced feeding so systematically. The Persians didn't invent torture, they perfected psychological warfare. Whether scaphism happened exactly as described or not, its absence from Persian records is telling. The Romans wanted crowds to see violence up close. The Persians preferred uncertainty. Both approaches aimed to control populations, but through different means. Rome shattered resistance with overwhelming force. Persia eroded it through dread of the unknown. Scaphism, whether real or rumored, epitomized this strategy, a punishment so terrible even the state wouldn't speak of it openly. Modern authoritarian regimes use similar tactics. North Korean executions happen in secret. Syrian prisons deny torture allegations, while survivors whisper stories. Terror doesn't always require visibility. Sometimes, ambiguity is more powerful. The Persian Empire lasted centuries not just through military strength, but by mastering fear's psychological dimensions. That's what makes scaphism's historical silence so chilling. If it was real, its erasure from records shows how empires rewrite history. If exaggerated, its persistence proves how rumors can become weapons. Ultimately, the lack of Persian accounts tells us as much as the Greek ones that true power lies not just in what you do, but in what you choose to let people believe. Scaphism forces us to confront a difficult question. How far can a civilization go before its cruelty defines it? The Persians claimed this punishment maintained order, but at what cost? Imagine enduring even one day trapped between boats, feeling insects burrow into your skin while remaining fully conscious. Most of us couldn't. Yet similar principles persist today, slower, subtler, but still grounded in controlled suffering. History warns us about power without limits, but we must choose whether to listen. Comment below, could you survive a single hour of scaphism? Because these aren't just ancient horrors, they're reminders of what humans remain capable of.